Session for the day. Real treat because we are going to finish on a presentation that's going to go beyond theory. It's going to introduce us to something that's very real, very practical, and something that anyone here may be able to participate in, and maybe we'll get to hear more how people can participate in something which really does break the boundaries of the things that we theorise about to the things that we will know with certainty. And it's really appropriate that Dr. Brooks Agnew is the person who's going to be talking to us about this topic. He's a former patent scientist. He's published thousands of papers, technical papers. He has retired from that to devote himself to this new field, exploring alternative knowledge. He's a very popular radio host on the X² radio, which is one of the fastest growing internet radio programs. And he's going to be talking to us about his inner Earth expedition. And he is someone that really is going to bring together that kind of left brain scientific analysis and ability to be able to reason through and assert the empirical evidence of validity to the things that others merely speculate about. And I think he's going to bridge those worlds of the empirical scientific with the more idealistic or speculative domain of, well, what exactly is inside the Earth. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Brooks Agnew.
Thank you. Here we go. I actually just came here for the water. I open these by reading a statement that came to me last August while next to Mount Adams. So excuse the refractory assistance. I need to add a little bit to my eyes. We live in a time treasured by all the scientific imaginations and hoped for by all the ancient historians. To deny this is to avoid the global enlightenment we speak about. The ancients left us with signs, symbols, and even writings to prepare us. The galactic community has been here for hundreds of centuries, trying to help our colony mature to the point we can join them as the explorers we were meant to be. Can we fail? Yes, we can. There are forces on the earth determined to destroy us. Up until now, our mission may have been unclear. Traditionally, we peaceful people have always fled to the wilderness. We have sacrificed ourselves to blaze trails through the frontiers of deserts, mountains, and perhaps into space to enjoy peace and freedom. Well, now the wilderness is no more. Evil has come to us and threatens to consume us or enslave us. Secretly and openly, we pray that their hearts will be changed or that they will magically go away. History tells us that they do not go away. The more we pray and appease, the more we will lose to them. But we're not a people of force. We are merciful and quick to forgive. So what can we do to transform the earth? Well, evil has an allergy: light. If we are enlightened or say that we are children of the light, then perhaps our mission is to help flood the earth with light. In the light, freedom can prosper. In the light, liberty and peace can flourish. We are trans-dimensional beings quite capable of visualizing the smallest quantum and the birth of new solar systems. Our astral bodies can move through space and time, but we need to remember how. Or we need to awaken the capabilities left for us in our DNA by the designer. In other words, it is time for the human race to transcend its instincts. It is time for us to trust our wings and take flight. It is time for us to realize that there is more than enough for everyone on this planet. Our potential is unlimited. The last 9 months of my life have been life-changing, to say the least. For 30 years I built cars, designed engineering systems to make things run more efficiently. I joined an expedition a couple of years ago to the North Pole led by Stephen Curry, expeditions out of Salt Lake City. I was going to help build a gyroscope and do some measurements on headspace analysis for seawater. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? It was. Well, I went to James Gilliland's ranch last August, and I gave a presentation on the destiny of the Earth. And Saturday night, August 19th, as I was meditating, getting ready for my presentation the following day, something happened, something amazing. Mount Adams somehow connected to me through my heart, and it was pounding on me like this softly, and it downloaded things into me. I still am trying to assimilate all that. I don't really understand how it happened, but it changed me. And I was confused as to why I got this information until I got home. I opened my email and found out that the expedition leader, Stephen Curry, had died. So I called the board and said, "What are you going to do?" They said, "We're going to elect you as the expedition leader." So things changed in September, and we began to mount this incredible expedition. The first thing we had to do was research everything that had been done on the hollow earth. Well, that was quite an amazing work because it didn't stop at Admiral Byrd. It didn't stop at Edmund Halley. It kept going back and back and back, and finally it made its way to Tibet. So we said, well, we have to go. We have to go to Tibet. This robe came from Tibet, so I thought I would wear it today in honor of them. So, you do have your seatbelts on, right? Okay. Here we go. This is me sitting on top of Tula. You saw a slide from that earlier. On the lower side there, you'll see I'm holding in my hands what looks like a rock-cutting device of those Atlanteans sitting on top of the temple at Tula. In the lower right, you recognize that, Stonehenge. In the upper right is the Temple of the Sun, and I'm actually sitting on top of the Temple of the Moon on the left-hand side. I have been a teacher, and I've been a scientist, and I've been an engineer. And I've been a talk show host of X Squared Radio, which fortunately is still going on. But my real claim here on this earth is I'm an Earth explorer. I had a very brave woman set an example for me last August. She took the microphone and told us all she was a star child. And that was one of my mentors, Angelica Whitecliffe, and I want to thank her so much for inviting me to come here publicly. Thank you so much. So I am going to match that by, this is my first time on this planet, and I think it's been beautiful so far. All the experiences, even the pain. My family is from Scotland. Loch Na, which is in the town of Stranraer, Scotland, on the western coast overlooking the Agnew Bay and Agnew Park, across from Agnew Crescent, looking toward Ireland. I guess you know I'm from the right place there. The castle was built in 1319, it burned and was rebuilt in 1426. We were the hereditary sheriffs of Galloway, responsible for law and order in that area, and for helping to build and protect Roslin Chapel, which was built in 1442. These symbols are cross-pollinated between both buildings. So I have a little bit of connection going back all the way as far as I can go to the year 1065. I co-authored The Ark of Millions of Years. Volume 1 is on the left, Volume 2 is on the right. Volume 1 takes us from creation up till now, and Volume 2 takes us from now to the year 2012. I'm a physicist by study and engineer by trade. My co-author is an archaeologist. Her claim to fame is discovering that National Geographic published a picture upside down. She went and found that. Well, we have to ask a question today because Scientists, some of them call into the radio program, some just ordinary people write me, why hollow earth theory? How crazy is that? Well, you know, something that my colleagues regularly do is as they conduct their experiments to prove or disprove their hypotheses, they gather data and they routinely throw it out because it doesn't fit their paradigm. So as I started to read about hollow earth theory in 2001, I was completely, first I was shocked. I said, yeah, right, the earth is hollow. Let's go rap on it and find out. Well, as I began to gather the data, I found that the rocks in the balance were even on both sides. Solid earth, hollow earth, solid earth, hollow earth. And I thought, and I've had a lot of discussions with geologists, and mind you, there are very few theoretical geologists out there, lots of theoretical physicists, but not many geologists, so they really didn't know. My PhD is in long-wave radiation spectroscopy, that's 25 words or less, and I often have discussions with geologists in the job trailers in the oil and gas industry, and really their knowledge only goes down about 20,000 feet. That's about 4 miles into the crust. That's it, that's all they know. The USGS, about 15 years ago, established a network of accelerometers, microphones laid all over the planet. Every time there's an earthquake, they gather data. We're going to show you some of that. The data falls into 2 camps for our study. First, space-based data, satellite photography and orbiting experiments. On the right-hand side are the Earth-based data. We have evidence in the sea, which we're going to show you, evidence in the sky, which we will discuss, evidence on the ice, evidence from earthquakes, and finally evidence from human consciousness. I think you'll find it interesting. First, let's talk about the evidence from space. Well, it's come from satellites. We don't have any special spacecraft that orbit the Earth studying the Earth. The space shuttle does take photographs from Earth, not live anymore because, well, they keep showing us stuff we're not supposed to see. But there are a few polar satellites, and these satellites go around the Earth, over the North Pole, over the South Pole, and they pretty much give us our weather data. But February 23rd of last year, the NOAA, which is the governing body of satellites, and the European Organization for Exploration of Meteorological Satellites, say that fast, or it's called EUMETSAT for short, they announced what they call the Data Denial Act. Yeah, that sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Basically, data denial means that real-time data, that means the real-time weather data from the satellites, can be cut off for certain latitudes for national security reasons, times of conflict or war. So we only get a view from these satellites from about 60 degrees north to about 60 degrees south. Unfortunately, there are no publicly available images of the North Pole. There used to be back in the 60s, and we'll show you a couple of those and explain the faults with the assumptions that were made from those. This is a picture from space of the aurora borealis. Now you can see the city lights blurred below on the Earth. So you can see we do take photographs of Earth from space all the time. Now there is a theory that's predominant. It's called the expanding Earth hypothesis. People want to know, how do planets form as hollow spheres? This is the guts of hollow Earth theory. Planets form from an accretion disk, and I got to thank Don Dixon for this graphic because it's just really striking. I like it. And these are huge disks of dust, and as they begin to shrink, they coagulate into planets. But you know what happens to a large disk that's spinning that shrinks to a small disk, right? Conservation of momentum. It spins faster and faster, sort of like an ice skater. As she begins a spin, she draws her arms in and she spins faster and faster and faster and faster until finally she explodes. No, she doesn't explode. But at least I haven't seen it on TV. But planets do strange things as they begin to spin faster and faster. I hit the wrong button. Hold on. All right. They reach a condition called planetary overspin. And this is where a planet begins to spin so fast that it actually throws off part of itself into space. We have an example of this in Venus and Mercury. spun so fast at one time that it actually spit off part of itself and it became a moon. It revolved around Venus for a long, long time. But Mercury was so large that eventually it broke loose from the orbit of Venus and assumed its own orbit around the sun. So that's how Mercury was formed, through an overspin condition of Venus. But not all planets do this. There's sort of a gray area. Some planets don't spin fast enough to throw off a piece of themselves. They just expand slowly. After they coagulate as a big dust ball in space, they begin to solidify and cool, and then the crust begins to expand as that planet spins. And some planets expand very slowly and meticulously, like Earth. Earth was once 1/3 its original size, and it's still expanding. We could take a submarine and go down to the bottom of the ocean right now, and we could see the ocean floor splitting open, lava filling in the gap, and the plates continually moving apart. Now, it only does it a few inches a year now, but we've had 4.5 billion years to do this. Molten rock fills in the gaps left by the expansion of Earth's crust, and all the continents once fit together with an inner sea. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see all the continents fit together like a key and a lock. Actually, shore, but certainly continental shelf to continental shelf. Hardly a piece is left out. Even in the Bible it says, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear," and it was so. Our Earth is alive. A lot of people don't realize that, but solar flares explode from the sun's surface hundreds of thousands of miles into space. These explosions cause X-rays and high-energy particles and gamma rays travel on a solar wind about 73 hours to the Earth. Earth's magnetosphere is generated by the crust rotating around a solid core at a different speed, like a motor, and it generates a magnetic field which protects our planet from solar radiation. If it were not so, the surface of our planet would be utterly sterilized. An example, Mars. It has no magnetosphere and is alive on the surface of Mars. We might talk about underneath Mars later, but the surface is absolutely sterile. And let's talk a little bit about evidence in the sea. Some of the marine life in the air and under the water is a little anomalous in the North Pole. This is a breed of seagull, often called Ross's gull. What's unique about this seagull is it doesn't fly south in the winter. It flies north. Well, penguins go north. They're nice and thick and blubbery, and even they die off if they don't huddle together. I think you saw March of the Penguins, right? Pretty fantastic film. But seagulls are not that way. They would be ice bobbers if they flew to the north, unless there was a warm place for them to go. Nobody's ever thought of putting a transmitter on a seagull and following it, but actually a transmitter would last long enough that would be small enough that a seagull could carry. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe we'll study that when we get up there. Let's talk about evidence under the sea. New sharks, new stingrays, and unknown sea life. This is just this last year. Have you ever seen a shark like that on the upper left-hand side in Hawaii? That's a pretty strange looking shark. That on the right-hand side was actually called a squeaky alien in the news. We don't have it because the Russians ate it. It was tasty, but it doesn't look like any fish we've ever seen before. And recently in Malaysia, they started doing a study on new species of rays. Oh, they thought they'd find 2 or 3. They found 150 new species of rays. Where are they coming from? What is making these new species in the sea? Why are these very, very ancient, once thought long extinct species being netted now? Could it have something to do with global warming and the caps shrinking a little bit and maybe the hole becoming more accessible? We'll discuss it. All right, let's talk about evidence in the earth. Seismology. Everybody knows what that is, right? In the oil and gas industry, they used to go dig a pit, put some dynamite in it, put some geophones stretched out on the ground. They dynamite up and make a thump in the ground. The sound waves would go down into the ground, bouncing off of all the structures, bounce back up into the geophones, and they would get an image of what the inside of the Earth looked like. Well, we don't like making explosions large enough to go all the way through the Earth, so we rely on Mother Nature to do it. Earthquakes. When there's an earthquake, this is what geology students see in their textbook. Every time there's a major earthquake, geologists collect a soil scan of the Earth. From the point of earthquake, which you see on the left-hand side of these graphs, to the accelerometers, which are on the right-hand side of the graphs, they pick up the vibrations. The problem is, and it's kind of funny because you'll see a very strange thing that geologists like to do. When they get a signal from the source and they don't know how it got there, they just draw a dotted line. It went this way. Yeah, the Earth is made just the way we say it is. Oh yeah, and this dotted line over here, yeah, it went this way. They actually have a zone they call the shadow zone. The shadow zone are where these unknown waves show up from the point of earthquake. So that's how they explain how the inner Earth is formed using earthquakes. Well, there was another mathematician, actually an analyst. His name was Jan Lambrecht. And he took the math data, except he didn't use any dotted lines. He just connected point A and point B the way it would be if a normal vibration was sent to the Earth. This is what he got. His model looks like this. And there's a problem. There are no shadow zones. The math works every single time. The problem is his model doesn't match the model in the textbook. His model says the Earth has a hollow space. There's a gap between the crust and the core. Well, now we have two pieces of evidence. We have the overspin condition the astronomers talk about, and now we have math data collected by the USGS. There's a scientist in the Atlantic Ocean right now, his name is Robert Weissessions, and he is collecting core samples of the sea floor of the Atlantic Ocean because his graduate students went over 100,000 seismograms, which were generated by the USGS and promptly filed and not analyzed. His grad students got a grant, analyzed them, and they said, holy cow, there's a sea under the Atlantic, the size of the Atlantic. We better go find out. So their boat is out there right now. I've invited Dr. Weissessions to join us on our expedition. Well, let's go a little bit further. Let's go into it. Let's see what our planet is made. Let's find out why finished planets cannot form as solid balls. Let's look at it from a physics point of view. 3 different points of view. Planets form as crusted spheres, not as solid balls. The center of gravity is actually in the center of the crust, not in the core. Let's take an Einstein example. Let's say in Hawaii, standing in the elevator of the Outrigger Hotel, and there were a lot of floors below G. In fact, it went all the way to the center of the Earth. And let's put a bathroom scale in the elevator. We're going to stand on the scale and take a measurement, and then we're going to hit the button and the elevator is going to go down all the way to the center of the Earth. What would you imagine your weight would do as you approach the middle? Well, here's our elevator shaft. Here's our imaginary man. He's going to go down his elevator way to the bottom, except now all the mass of the Earth is above him. So he weighs nothing. There is no gravity in the center of the planet. Planets form as crusted balls. They do it on a microscopic level, they do it on the scale of Earth, and they do it on giant planets as well. There is no crushing force in the center of the planet. In fact, the acceleration on the surface of the planet is about 32 feet per second squared. On the inside of the crust, it's about 21 feet per second squared, about 1/3 less. That means that if there was life on the inside of this crust, it would be prone to giantism, and that would exist in plants and animals. It would also probably suffer far less degenerative disease from gravity, like arthritis, like joint wear. So animals might not go extinct that normally would. They would live a long time. There's also a rumor that there might be an inner sun inside the earth. Well, I've sort of imported an image of the sun here, but it's probably not a fusion sun like we have above us. It's probably a ball of molten metal that puts off in the high infrared range, enough for photosynthesis, but not enough to get a sunburn. You probably have to adapt. Of course, without being exposed to shortwave solar radiation, you might live a long, long time. All of this seems to fit together with other ideas. Hang on a second. I hit the left button instead of the bottom one. Here we go. We often talk about a North Pole passage. Now, it's been written about in books, The Smoky God, The Hollow Earth, Admiral Byrd's Diary, a lot of maybe rumor, maybe speculation, but I'm not the kind of scientist that throws out data. I'm going to collect all the data. In fact, I've spoken to channelers. I'm not a channeler, at least I hope I'm not a channeler, but I don't deny that they receive messages from the inner earth. I do take it with a grain of salt, but it's a piece of data and I'm not going to throw it out. They say that there's a thinning in the North Pole, a thinning of the crust. That means there should be less gravity in the North Pole. That means that the geomagnetic structure of the Earth near the North Pole should be different than it is everywhere else. Well, these kinds of things can be measured. So we're going to put these experiments on a ship, and we're going to take them by sea to this point, and we're going to measure what we see. So what would a North Pole passage look like? We have an ocean on the outside of our planet. We can see it right out here. Must mean we have an ocean on the inside of the planet as well. Only this ocean would not have a horizon. This would be, there's supposed to be a graphic come across here. I'm going to say it. It would be a land with no horizon. When we go out here and sail on the water, the horizon just keeps coming up to us as we sail toward it. We get about 8 or 9 miles of perspective. On the inside of the earth, there would be no horizon. So what ancient cultures have symbols of an inner earth? Well, as far back as we could go, the clearest one that we kept hearing about was in Tibet. Well, Tibet is a pretty hard trip. I had an incredible stroke of luck. No, an incredible stroke of synergy. I met with my friend Maureen St. Germain, who was also planning a trip to Tibet. An opening came up, an incredible opening. I had 10 days to make up my mind. I consulted the board. The board said, go. So I went. 16 days, I did not get below 12,000 feet. My lungs feel it. I went as high as 17,500 feet, which you will see film from that point. It is not an easy trip. It is not a vacation. This symbol that you see in this slide is the symbol of Tibetan Buddhism. The deer on either side represent how the animals responded to the idea of Tibetan Buddhism when it was first explained to the people by King Gampo. King Gampo is the one in the 7th century. As it turned out, Tibet was quite successful in those days and conquered 9 nations, including China. I'm not sure if it was by force all the way. Some of it may have been by diplomacy. But rather than enforce Tibetanism on the other nations, King Gampo said, I'll marry 9 princesses, and part of their dowry will be a part of their culture. And he consolidated all of these and created Tibetan Buddhism. He created the Tibetan language. This is an ancient religion in the 7th century formed out of whole cloth. There is no precursor to it. There's a little piece here and a little piece there, but it's a complete invention. What you are about to see has never been filmed or photographed by someone from the West. We've got in areas that were padlocked and locked away. I don't know how. The guide that I had from Tibet, his name was Punsala, had been in these buildings over 50 times. Never had they unlocked these doors. This time he asked, and they said yes. These are communist Chinese guards. They let us in, they let me film, and what you are about to see and what is on that DVD outside has never been seen before.
The North Earth expedition has brought us here to Tibet, high above the city of Lhasa, almost 14,000 feet. Behind me is the symbol of Tibetan Buddhism. At the core of their belief is this symbol. In the center, you'll see the yin and yang. From that, you'll see rays of light coming out to an outer ring. That ring is full of foliage. This is also recognized around the world as a universal symbol of an inner earth. Locked into Tibetan Buddhism as far back as history goes. This afternoon, we're going to talk to a High Lama and see if we can find out the roots of this Tibetan Buddhism. It's almost 14,000 feet. You can see the snow on the Himalayas in the background. We're traveling the world, assembling the pieces one by one. Next year, we'll complete the North Pole Inner Earth expedition, so you'll know the truth, how this Earth is constructed, and why we are here and where we're going.
Not much air at 14,000 feet. Took a lot of breaths to say that. When we walked into the temple in Lhasa, walked into the hotel at Lhasa. By the way, if you plan on going to Tibet, realize this, there's no heat in the hotels. When it's outside, it is inside. I spent a night in a hotel at 28 degrees. They'll give you all the quilts you want, but you better have an internal source of heat. And you better like rice or yak butter. Whew, I hope I never smell that again. Anyway, when I walked into the hotel, here was this symbol. Yin and yang in the center, rays of light going out to a ring with foliage on it. It was very exciting to see. This symbol was everywhere. Every building we went to in the wilderness, and believe me, we're talking a wilderness, we're about 7,000 feet above the tree line. There's no trees, there are no bushes, there's very little grass. Actually, I saw them planting lots of stuff because it was in early April, but it doesn't rain much there either. These are several different temples in 4 different cities where this symbol is to be found. The symbol exists not only in Tibet, this is their inner star symbolism. It also exists almost identical in Roslin Chapel, about 9,000 miles away in a little town called Roslin, Scotland. In the ceiling, almost exactly the same thing. And also about 1,000 years apart in time. So are there other planets that might be hollow? Many of you, some of you might have seen this photography from Cassini, which is orbiting Saturn. There's a huge windstorm on Saturn right now. By the way, Saturn's undergone some pretty strange changes. Cassini has been orbiting now for about 18.5 years. In that 18.5 years, the atmospheric pressure of Saturn has changed by 30%. If the atmospheric pressure of Earth changed in 18 years by 30%, we would be somewhere else. This is a planet undergoing huge changes. We don't really understand why. But we are completely flabbergasted. Science does not understand why these hexagon shapes occur in rapidly spinning large molecular bodies. In the atmosphere of Saturn, there is this 5-sided shape right above the pole. We have very similar things here on Earth. This is an overhead shot of Katrina. You can see in the core the same hexagon shape. If I had enough time, I could show you 10 more hurricanes with the same shape in the middle. Something about this vortex creates this sacred geometry. It makes a lot of sense to human beings when you look at us from up above, and I'll explain that in just a second. Just another piece of video.
across the border from Tibet into Nepal. On that side of the river is Tibet. On this side is Nepal. We're on the road home. Next year, join us as we travel to Tibet, the rooftop of the world, to discover the secrets of the inner earth.
It was just a neat clip. I thought I would in there. 1,000-foot waterfalls fascinate me. You have them here on Hawaii too, but I don't have time to go see them because I wanted to hear all these wonderful speakers. This was filmed at 8,000 feet. A lot better environment. Let's talk a little bit about the Himalayas. These pictures were taken from a JP-31. That's a twin-engine turboprop. We chartered it so that we'd get a close-up shot of the Ring of Power of these great mountains. Of course, on the lower left is a picture of Everest. That's 8,844 meters. That's a long way up. I'm glad the cabin was pressurized. I'm also glad that there are no cabin doors in Nepal, because they invited me into the cockpit and I actually took these pictures on my knees out the front window of the aircraft. A lot better window than the side ones. And that's K2 to the right and a little view of the Ring of Power on the right hand side. You'll see actual video out the front of the airplane in the film, which you can purchase outside. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Christ grid, this energy grid that is around the Earth. We're going to try to connect the dots here real quick because we're going to go into the human consciousness portion of the Hollow Earth theory. All of you in this room have no problem with there being an energy grid on the Earth. We often connect to it. We realize that the Earth, like us, is a combination of spiritual matter and temporal matter. It's not so hard to understand for humans. I mean, we're not made of calcium and carbon and sodium and water. We are, but that's not what animates us. That's not what Michael is. That's not what Marlene is. That's not what Adam is. We are eternal beings inside this, moving it, motivating it, shaping it. We actually make our own shape by what we eat, by how we act, by how we move, how we exercise. We make ourselves into our own image. Earth does the same thing. Earth is a spirit body and a physical body put together. Earth is a living thing upon which other living things live and have to live in harmony. We know this. We had an amazing being come to this planet, and he established something in the Akashic record that no other being could do. It was necessary. It allows us to reach ascension in one single lifetime. We tie into it some sacred geometry when we connect these dots. It's called the Merkaba. It looks something like this. This symbol, this sky tetrahedron and earth tetrahedron mesh together. You've seen it several times during this conference already, described in much better detail than I'm doing now. But it exists and centers inside of us, and it also exists and centers inside the earth. In order to meet all the conditions of this experiment, we could just take measurements. We could just thump the earth and run film. And we would come back with pictures of whales and ice and ice and whales. Or we could meet the conditions of the experiment laid out for us by over 1,500 years of other explorers. Ones who have gone by sea and ones who have gone by astral travel. We could try to raise the consciousness of this group to a point where we could tap into this energy. We, and by tap in, I mean we only have a few senses in this physical body, correct? We have a sense of sight, which some works better than others. Mine doesn't focus all the way in. But actually sight, in the information that's available in the universe, is a very small band of energy. It goes from about 350 nanometers up to about 950 nanometers. That's a billionth of a meter. That's a really small bandwidth that the rods and cones in our eyes can pick up. So when people say seeing is believing, that's pretty ignorant. One of my friends, Jose Escamilla, takes 2 cameras, turns one to infrared, leaves the other on visible. He duct tapes them together, and he goes and films stuff side by side. I have seen him film UFOs in the sky. You cannot see anything on the visible screen. On the infrared screen, it's as plain as the nose on your face, but your eyes would never see it. How many of you have photographed orbs before with a digital camera? Can you see them with your naked eye? Sometimes. You really have to be in a higher consciousness. You've got to be able to raise your vibrational level to the point where you can pick up those wavelengths. Now, a camera can pick it up because the CCD that's in there is sensitive to a little bit higher wavelength than you are. The neat thing about the software is it converts it into visible light and puts it right in the picture for you. In the film, I don't have actually a photograph of it because the Chinese wouldn't let us flash pictures in there. So I kind of ran my camera down here by my side, and I got the film anyway, but I couldn't flash a picture. So I don't have stills of it. You have film of it, and it's on the DVD outside. Hanging from the ceiling inside one of these temples were the future Buddha, whose name is Maitreya. I'll tell you a little story about him in just a second. Hanging from the ceiling by fishing line were glass Christmas ornaments. You know, the little balls that you hang on your tree. Big ones, small ones, red, blue, gold, silver. I was asking my guide, as around this room were stacked 12 golden giants. Big, tall, what didn't look like Buddhas, but they looked like big fellas. I said, what are those around the outside? He said, well, in those days there were giants, and the giants protected the Buddha. The Buddha's here in the middle. Well, that made incredible sense to me. And then I asked him, what are the glass balls hanging from the ceiling in various arrangements around the room? He said, I'm not sure. I think they're planets. I said, nope, those are orbs. The people in this building, the monks that manage this building, want the dimensionally blind to be able to see the orbs they see through meditation. They want the thousands of pilgrims that come there every day to know the higher masters are there, and they care about them and love them, and they want them to know that they're not alone when they come there. That's why they're there. It all ties into this energy grid, and it's everywhere. These are called tankas. These are very ornate hangings. You can see the little curtain up here at the top. This is designed to cover it when it's not in use, to keep dust and things off of it, because Tibet's a very dusty place. But you can see the detail in this. This is the earth that they draw over and over again. Look at the spirals of energy inside this. If you can't see those, you can see these. You see how the Vesica Piscis overlaps over and over again, all this holy geometry? These are over 1,000 years old, these designs. And again, out of the core of the earth. And again, they understood the energy of the earth. They tried to explain it to us graphically because the Tibetans did not have a written language until the 7th century. This is a Tibetan mandala building. We thought they were just drawings. We thought they were just two-dimensional things that they made with sand. This is a building. Inside this building are incredibly elaborate paintings. You walk your way level by level to the very top where you see this kind of a basket thing at the top. I'm going to call it a basket thing. In a minute, I'm going to tie this in to something that should be very familiar to you. Inside this building are 108 rooms that when one meditates through them, they'll reach enlightenment. We were able to get into the very top of this building through 2 trapdoors, 2 locks, 1 Chinese guard, and 2 monks. And they allowed us to film from inside the top of this. The power was so amazing. It took me 5 takes to get it out of my mouth what I was going to say in the film. You'll be able to tell when you see it. Inside this building is a residence that's unbelievable. And I didn't meditate through all 108 rooms. We didn't have time. This building, I'm sorry, that's the very top of it from the ground. Inside this building, which is the tallest building in the world up until 100 years ago, inside this building is another one of these, except it's 25 feet in diameter and it's made out of solid gold. And it is a scale model of that. And what the Dalai Lama used to do when he was allowed to be in the country before 1959 is they would sit and meditate on that model. And they would mentally go through each of the 108 rooms. Sometimes it would take them days, sometimes weeks. As they meditated through these rooms, they became enlightened. What does that mean? This is incredible. Inside this building, which was built in 1989 by the 14th Panchen Lama, the reason he built it is because the Chinese attacked this place. There are cannon holes in some of these walls around here. And they desecrated the graves of the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Panchen Lamas. The 14th Panchen Lama was able to make enough inroads with the Chinese government, and he himself being quite wealthy, built this building and reinterred the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Panchen Lamas into a specially made structure, very ancient, called a stupa. A stupa uses the same or performs the same purpose as a pyramid does for the Egyptians. Now, the Egyptians didn't bury people in pyramids. They used the pyramids as an access point, as an opening, a portal, a stargate key. One sits in the sarcophagus or lays down in the sarcophagus of Giza. It's not a tomb, it's a portal. People that lay down in this, without exception, report an experience not unlike Bombay doors opening up and you drop out into space. This is what the Egyptians built this for. What you are about to see has not been photographed before. The stupa is an ancient Tesla coil. I recognized it when I saw it. The one you're about to see is over 60 feet tall. It uses over 4,300 pounds of gold. It has over 10,000 jewels in it. It is made to exacting specifications. I know this because it's duplicated over and over and over again, all over Tibet, all over Nepal, all over Buddhism as far as you can go. And it has no precursor. There's no first version of the stupa. It's just bam, there it is. What did they use it for? This Panchen Lama did a wonderful job of explaining this to us because he put it in symbolism in the building. On the left-hand side, you're about to see this over 6 high structure, 4,300 pounds of gold. Everything in it is stylized, but is perfectly understandable. There are 13 coils to this gold standing up above. You can see the rays of gold coming down each side out of the reflector in the top. They even put streamers around it and jewels on it like sparkling diamonds so that you could see that this was an energy beam that was being generated by this structure. Right in the front of it is a golden arch. And inside the golden arch is the interred Panchen Lama. I'll give you a close-up of it, just so that you can see how clearly they wanted us to understand this is an energy chamber. They created this structure to do one thing: open a 4-dimensional stargate. This is what's on the ceiling, dead center, above that Panchen Lama's tomb. This is what they were able to open. How many people have seen The Last Mimsy? Ha ha ha, it's cool. The Last Mimsy is just a kid's movie, or so you think. But it is quite moving when you see the symbolism in this movie and you see how it's tied together. with a Stargate. The Tibetans, maybe they didn't know something, but maybe they witnessed something operate, and they copied it. And they copied it thousands of times all over their country. And you know what? It's very satisfying for this people, because they're a very simple, very loving people. Nikola Tesla, he said he received pure visions of his inventions, usually while in a dream state. Well, that's very familiar to me now. Downloads of high technology are common throughout history. I have interviews of major mathematicians that went to the end of known math and received pure visions of finished formulas. It took mathematicians sometimes decades to derive where they got the formulas from. These were done. They just recited them. Sakar, Riemann, Maxwell, all of these changed the world by the downloads that they got. Could these messages come from the inner earth? Is this technology necessary to unlock the gate? The Tibetan people are a simple people with an ancient knowledge. They knew how these things tied. They didn't know why. Excuse me. They didn't know why. They didn't know how it was constructed. But they knew what it was supposed to look like, and they built it. These two lower pictures are of a nomad's household that we visited. This is about 13,000 feet. It's beginning to warm up, and in about a month, they're going to move to higher ground so that their goats can continue to graze. In the lower right-hand picture, you'll see my roommate on this trip. His name is Jose Valadez, and he's giving gifts to these nomads. Simple things like noodles and orange juice, a toothbrush, a simple bowl, because they just don't have much. But you know what? They're pretty happy with what they have. They're a very devout people. This is on the Barkor, going around one of the temples where the holiest statue of Buddha is in all of Tibet. They routinely prostrate themselves on the ground in humility, and they allowed us to photograph them doing this. They're a devout and humble people. These are Tibetan monks practicing debating. You'll see a little clip of it in the film. It's quite dramatic. I'll try to demonstrate. This is a still shot, but by no means is this a still scene. The person sitting on the ground is actually receiving a question. And the person that's standing up with his arm like this is the freeze frame, but here's kind of what he would do. Tell me the two great principles in life. He would slap his hands together, wind up like a professional pitcher, and deliver that with force and intention at that person, and he would have to answer. And if he didn't, there was a coach with him. Here's the answer. And they rehearsed and rehearsed, and in an hour, they would switch places. And one would deliver the question to the other. Well, there are about 800 monks in this courtyard, so you can imagine what it sounded like. It was really tremendous, and we have a good recording of it. This is Tashi Tsering, arguably the most popular in all of Tibet. He left in 1957, did not speak a word of English, and had no money because the Chinese were coming in to take over the country. He came to the United States, he was educated here, and in 1961, he said, I am now educated, I'm free, but I feel compelled to go back to Tibet because I have a mission. And so he arranged, people put money, flew back into communist Tibet. For 4 years, he approached the government to try to start, with his own money, a school. After 4 years, the Chinese government finally believed him that he was not going to teach anti-communist or anti-Marxist doctrine. He just wanted kids to learn to read and write. They let him build his first school. Since that, he has built 72 schools. He's 77 years old. He's the author of a book on himself, very good book. He's a scientist. I sat down and talked to him about hollow earth theory, and he loved it. It made so much sense to him. We could have talked for hours, but you see in the back corner here is Mrs. Saring, and she runs a bar. Okay, they're microbrewers, that's what they are, yeah. And they have a little courtyard outside, and Tibetans come by and imbibe. And part of his responsibility is to take care of the place, so they cut short our conversation. But it was a great conversation. Went in my notes. It was a pleasure to meet him. And then there were the Tibetan nuns. We found these women living in 400-year-old ruins. No running water, no electricity, no heat. 13,000 feet. Cardboard on the windows. Pictures of Dalai Lama all on the inside of their rooms, and the sweetest, absolute sweetest people on earth. They allowed us to come into their chanting hall, and they let us chant with them for 2 hours. They taught us a chant, and we taught them a chant, and we sang together, and we had a good time together. They range in age from 18 to 80. They perform acts of service. They worship, and they sing, and they study the scriptures, and they're a joyful people. There are 138 of them living in this area. And I have to give credit to my off-roading bus driver, because he took a diesel-powered bus in places a diesel-powered bus is not supposed to go. Up this dirt road, over very narrow bridges to get to this point, and we were able to visit with him. This is the Ring of Power from the non-snow side. This is 17,500 feet. There's a little bit of video from this in the film, not much because it's very difficult to breathe at this altitude. But the one thing that stands out in this picture is you will see thousands of little stacks of rock that go clear over the horizon. These are little private shrines that people build. They hike their way up to this point. They stack a few rocks together in this point that's so close to the grid around the earth. It's so tied in to what they call the root chakra of the earth. And that is this string of mountains called the Himalayas. And they build a little shrine, and they say a little prayer, and they leave the prayer there where the mountain is, and then they go home. Now, it's a little principle called entailment. I said that I was going to explain this to a couple people earlier in the week. Here it is from a physics point of view. In a single molecule, there is an electron cloud. I don't want to even call it orbits of electrons, but certain particles on this molecule, let's say beryllium, can exhibit a very strange, although repeatable behavior. Electromagnetically, we can pick one of those particles off of this, and we can pick another particle off, and we can move effectively an infinite distance apart. In the first case, it was a few centimeters, which is a long way for a molecule. Electromagnetically, we measure the spin of those two molecules. Through effect, we change the spin of one particle, and instantaneously the other particle changes spin at the same time. We don't know why. We call it entanglement. It's very repeatable. Advanced physics students do this all the time. In 1999, a woman separated two particles by 11 kilometers, and they did the same thing. They still changed spin at the same time. Not at the speed of light. Oh, no, 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 no. Not even 1,000,000 times the speed of light. Instantly. Instantly. So we are talking about changing spin from +1/2 to -1/2, and the other one going from -1/2 to +1/2 instantly. Well, it doesn't take a rock scientist to figure out that's a binary signal, 0 and 1, on and off, +1, -1. What you have is the makings of an instantaneous modem. I discussed this with Jim Bell, who is the scientist at Cornell University that runs the rovers on Mars. And I said, what we need to do, Jim, is we need to build a ion modem. And he went, "What's that?" I said, "It uses entangled particles as an instantaneous transmitter from Mars to Earth. You install one in your next rover, and now you don't have to upload the signal to the orbiter, wait for the orbiter to line up with Earth, beam the signal to Earth, wait 91 hours for it to get here, decode it, send back your response, which takes 9 hours to get there, hit the orbiter, have the orbiter send it back down to the rover, and turn left." It takes a long time to move the rovers around. And it doesn't matter how fast the software is if your modem's slow. Gosh, how many people remember dial-up? If I have to send another email by dial-up, that's it. I'm sledgehammering my computer. I wait on microwave ovens, okay? I like things to move quickly. Well, he's a blank. But those don't exist. I said, "Jim, of course they exist. We just have to build it. The idea is already there. It's already been done somewhere in the future, but let's do it. Let's build it." So anyway, we'll see what happens with his grad students. I think he's running his own grand game. But in any case, this idea of entangled particles gets pretty unique when you start thinking of it, when you look at it from a Tibetan point of view. I can stack up some rocks at 17,500 feet. I can walk 200 miles back home. And what happens on the mountains happens in me. Because every day we have to eat. And whether you eat carrots or whether you eat cow, sooner or later you're going to consume particles. And they're going to become part of your body. Every 14 years, every cell in your body is changed out, every molecule in it, except for maybe the fillings in your teeth. It changes out, which means you are consuming particles that are entangled with other particles, either on this earth or even in other worlds, or even in other beings. And that means that when intention changes that particle spin, it changes it in you. Does that mean you're affected by the universe? Well, yes, but even more powerfully, it means that you affect the universe. By your own intention, your own consciousness, you affect the universe. So do you think the Tibetan people are thinking about being affected by the mountains? Or do you think they're thinking about affecting the mountains with their own consciousness, their own humility, their own faith, their own devout lives? Maybe the Tibetans know something we don't know. So what is the next step in the exploration of the inner earth? By the way, this is a very unique space photograph. Last February, the last Saturday of February, NASA very quietly at 6 a.m. in the morning launched a satellite that divided itself into 5 pieces. It's called the Themis probe. The Themis probe is putting itself into position to do one mission: measure where the darn aurora borealis comes from. We thought we had this figured out until this photograph came out. We thought it came from the sun. Thought the sun explodes and sends these cosmic rays to Earth, and as the solar wind blows over the Earth, while particles high up in the atmosphere glow into charged oxygen particles and ribbons, and it goes around the other side of the Earth, and that's where the aurora borealis comes from, and everybody knows that. But what would cause an aurora borealis on the north and south poles at the same time? Oops. And they did a scatter plot between the solar wind and the occurrence of the aurora borealis, and guess what? No correlation. Oops. Statistically not sound. So they launched the Themis probe. We got to find out what causes the aurora borealis. It might come from the Earth. And if it comes from the Earth, that means something is coming out of the center of the Earth. And that means there has to be a way for energized particles to come out of the inner Earth into the atmosphere and cause the aurora borealis. As luck would have it, the Themis probe is going to be in position just about the same time as the North Pole Inner Earth expedition is going to be in position. We'll see who keeps who honest. For entertainment, in the spirit of exploration, we're going to conduct the greatest geological expedition in the history of the world to a land with no horizon. Now, this is an artist's rendition of what it look like. We don't know if the opening is that big or if it's 80 miles across or if it's 6 miles across. But I will tell you, I have spoken to the crew, or certain crew members of the Yamal, who have sailed close to this area, and they swear that sea level is not sea level. They say there's a depression in the ocean. You can't really see it because you only have 8 miles of perspective across the ocean. If it's 100 miles across, you're not going to see this dip. You might feel the ship go down a little bit into a swell and then maybe a day later come out of the swell. But that's all you're going to feel. And you can't measure the distance between the sea and the sea floor because the sea floor might dip the same amount. And you can't measure it with GPS because GPS satellites don't work at the North and South poles. You only get 3 the 80th parallel, above the 70th parallel, you only get 3 satellites. That's all you can connect to at any one time. That's not enough for altitude. It's enough for X and Y location on the surface. It's good for navigation. But for ships, it's no good. Airplanes can maybe get it at 8 miles up, but not ships. So how are you going to measure it? Well, we're going to build a gyroscope, and we're going to measure the curvature of the Earth. As the ship is moving forward, that gyroscope accelerates a little bit too fast for the curvature of the Earth. We've sailed into a depression. We're going to try and sail across at least 3 points of this so that we can plot the arc. Once we have the arc, we have the diameter. Once we have the diameter, we know where to take core samples off the bottom. We know where to take marine life samples. We know where to take water samples. The acidity should be different. The salinity should be different. The magnetic flow should be different. Maybe even the plankton will be different at that. We might pick up biological, we might pick up botanical, like plant life coming up out of the bottom. The temperature might be different. None of this has ever been measured before. This is a new planet. I can tell you this. The Inner Earth Expedition is a very exciting mission. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's never been done before, which makes it even better. But I can't go to the moon. That's out of the can't do it. I can't go to Mars. I can look at it through a little bitty camera that's running around on there when they let me look through it, but I can't go there. But we can go to the North Pole. That planet I can go to. The music you're about to hear was composed by a person who says they channeled it from the inner earth. It is sung by the Portland Philharmonic Girls Choir. We heard, some of us here in this room, heard one girl sing a song last August up at James Gilliland's ranch. She sang a song called Ancient Cities about the sinking of Atlantis. It moved me to tears. This song is sung by the choir. See what it does for you. On the face of the earth that can make this trip. It's only civilian 4 months out of the year. The rest of the time it's in service of the Russian government. It's the only, it holds 100 passengers. It has a crew of 150. We believe we can take this ship to this location. You can see it has a helicopter on it. It also has another boat on it. There are a lot of measurements we can make from this ship. We plan on spending 15 days at sea. We plan on spending about 9 of those days on location. The idea is to get this ship in the right place at the right time and shoot 5 documentaries. The first is going to be Our Hollow Earth. The second is going to be global warming, a North Pole perspective. The third is on human consciousness, because those 100 people are going to be in a workshop like this for 15 days, and there's no going home. You will live it, breathe it, and sleep it for 15 days. Those 100 people will be changed. The other film will be UFOs at the North Pole. We have one of the best UFO filmmakers on Earth going with us. And the fifth is the Aurora Borealis, from Earth or the Sun. We're going to try and take as many measurements, as many photographs as we can. And if we can, we'll tie it into the Themis Pro, but if we can't, we'll make our own independent publication. The mission statement is to build a team with the right skills and the right consciousness to reintroduce the human race to their family in the inner Earth and beyond. If you ever get a chance, tune into X Squared Radio. We talk about this and other things every Sunday from 6 to 9 p.m. And remember this, you are Source. My name is Brooks Agnew, and I thank you very much.